Hello, 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 and welcome everyone to our second Fireside Chat for Trey Season 3. My name is LaJoy Royce, and I'm the Program Director for Trey Athletes. This Fireside Chat will be moderated by my colleague Brian Reynolds with the wonderful Batouly Camara when we'll be discussing athletes as influencers, followed by a Q&A session. Feel free to submit questions at any time throughout the conversation to be considered through the Q&A function. There will also be an opportunity to appear on video and ask questions live if you would like to. For all of our Season 3 participants, don't forget your team can win a pizza party by engaging with Trey on social media and tagging us at Trey Athletes. Check the chat for our tag. For additional rules, you can see us on Instagram. Tonight's chat is presented by Trey Athletes. We are a Dallas youth sports nonprofit, and our mission is to empower athletes to be leaders, role models, and influential voices for their communities. We believe that by providing high school athletes with the opportunity to learn from amazing speakers, we will provide insight and tips for success. With that, I'm going to transition to Brian. Thank you.
Thank you so much, LaJoy, and welcome, everyone. I'm Brian Reynolds, co-founder and co-CEO of Trey Athletes, and tonight we're talking with speaker, author, nonprofit founder, and professional basketball player, Batouly Camara. A native New Yorker with family roots in Guinea, West Africa, Batouly is an international and TEDx speaker, an ESPYs honoree, a children's book author, a professional basketball player, and a scholar. Woo! As a freshman in college, Batouly played for Kentucky's women's basketball team for 1 year, where she and her teammates earned a trip to the Sweet 16. After transferring to UConn, where she played on the women's basketball team for 3 years, Batouly and her teammates earned 3 consecutive Final Four appearances. Batouly graduated from UConn with her bachelor's degree in sports management and a master's degree in sport for peace and development. After college, Batouly went on to create opportunities for young girls around the world by founding Women and Kids Empowerment, WAKE. WAKE is a nonprofit geared to educate, equip, and empower young girls through sport, education, and social entrepreneurship. Batouly has organized 10 basketball camps in 8 different countries with almost 1,000 participants in planned sport activities and life skills workshops in order to increase awareness and break down barriers that young girls face in society. In November of 2020, Batouly was named to Forbes 30 Under 30 sports list, which highlights young people who are making a difference in their field. Batouly is currently playing basketball professionally in Spain, and she's joining us today from New York City. Welcome, Batouly.
Thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure is all ours. And as you can tell from her incredibly impressive bio, Batouly is the epitome of a modern athlete activist, both locally and globally. We're absolutely thrilled to have her talking with us today about the history of athletes as influencers. And as our program director, LaJoy, discussed, we at Trey Athletes are focused on teaching high potential high school athletes how to come alive through sports, both on and off the court or field. Before we start, we think it's important to mention our 3 Trey impact pillars. Number 1, social emotional learning, which is a fancy way of talking about identity and managing your emotions. Number 2, college and career exposure, specifically tailored to athletes. And number 3, community and family engagement, where we as athletes work to make our communities a better place. Today, we're going to focus on number 3, community and family engagement. And we're going to dig deep to talk about why athletes have had an outsized impact on their communities, specifically through championing social movements. So Batouly, to kick things off, when did you first realize that sports provided you with a platform to create social change?
I would say the first time that I realized that was when I was in high school. And I vividly remember we had a service learning trip and we went to a women's shelter. And from there, she asked anyone, is there anyone who plays basketball? And it was an immediate, connection from those and from the women who were in the shelter and from us as women's basketball players, and really connecting with them. And it felt like a greater sense and a greater purpose, because at that moment they told us, you represent us. When we're cheering for something bigger than ourselves, you represent that. And so for me, being a high school player, I knew the extent of basketball, in my community, and those who made it professionally and they were able to give to their communities. But at that moment, it was standing face to to face as someone who felt immediately connected to what I was doing and felt like everything that we did as a team represented them, as they were cheering us on. And that's how they bonded with their community, and that's how they identified with themselves. And so that was really a moment where I said, this platform is bigger than myself, bigger than our team, and it stands for something so much greater.
That's incredible. I think that one of the things that I've heard from you when we've talked previously is how eloquently, I can't even say the word. That's how eloquent I am tonight. You speak as it relates to connecting, your passion and your mission with real life interactions, and really helping sort of like guide you along the way. I think that like what we've learned about Wake and what I know is absolutely incredible. So maybe next, talk to us a little bit more about your work at Wake. How did you choose to focus your attention on empowering women and girls in West Africa through sport? And I guess what about this cause is most important to you and why?
I always start my bio with where I'm from because first generation Guinean native New Yorker, and for me, my mom, was born and raised in Guinea, West Africa, but found a way to bring Guinea to New York. I'm still trying to figure out how she did that. But it was amazing. And I always say to myself, I learned history lessons instead of fun facts. And so it was my mother, really sharing stories of how she was raised, opportunities that weren't afforded to her, that we had. School is a luxury. And some days we wake up, I don't want to go to school, or I don't feel like it. And hear my mom saying, this is an opportunity that not everyone has. And so really painting a vivid picture of where she came from. And then at the same time, being able to step out of little Guinea in our house and go out into New York and just see the world at large. And so growing up in a city, you see so much, you're exposed to so much. And I'm so thankful that I had mentors around me who really answered my questions. What is going on? What is this about? And never shamed me for being curious. And so those are two things that are always at the forefront. And those were my strong pillars. That's where I was raised, and that was my foundation. And when I entered sport, it wasn't more so about, the competition, which I grew to love, but it was about the sisterhood and the community that I felt. And again, being surrounded by incredibly amazing women who were doing amazing work, but seeing that life wasn't particularly easy for them. And so once I was older, it felt like a natural progression of just leaning into what I knew, um, what felt like the foundation of who I was. And so when I was sitting down and saying, what's the name? What do I want to do? And I remember I just blurted out, I said, I want to empower women and kids, through sports. And that was it. And that felt so right. And that felt like a part of me. And so it never feels like work. It feels like an extension of myself. And the work that we do is all things that I sit down and I talk to women and kids about. And I say, what do you want out of your life, out of your experience, for your community, for your future? And how can I support you in that process? And so Women and Kids Power started in 2017 when I was going into my junior year of college. And our goal was to empower women and kids through sport, education, and social entrepreneurship programming, from conversations, from mutually beneficial relationships, and saying, how can we support one another and grow in this realm? And it has been more than I could have ever imagined. But again, it started from who I felt like I was, and my foundation.
Talk to us even a little bit more about kind of the programming that you bring to bear, and what your goals are for the organization itself.
So in our programming, we work through camps. So we're changing models a little bit, which is so exciting for me. But we were an annual based program, and that was through camps in the summer. Again, I was a full-time athlete, balancing school. And so a majority of things that we did were in the summer, and that was camps. And I feel like sport is just such a great entry point for larger conversations. So for goal setting, for yoga, for holistic development. And the biggest aspect that we have in our programming and in our camps is self-actualization. And we always do this technique with athletes and student athletes and young leaders. We say, who are you without what you do? Without the title, without athlete, who are you? And oftentimes in those first minutes, you'll see a lot of, young people really start to struggle. Who am I? I have no identity. And it's like, yes, you're an amazing sister. You're an amazing brother. You're an amazing listener. You're an amazing reader. You're an amazing writer. All these different things that we don't hone in on. And as a student athlete, you spend 40 hours a week on your craft and growing and developing your game. How much of that goes into being an amazing sister, an amazing writer, other things that really feed you and that all come together to make you who you are. And so that's a huge part of our camps. And initially, early on, it was having those conversations in those camps. So in India, having conversations, what do you want out of your experience for us to build that? And I think everything happens with a strong foundation. So that was important to us early on, having a camp-like setting, but really having conversations early on in holistic development, yoga, play, arts and crafts, but just really immersing ourselves into the community and figuring out what was best for us to now start that. And now we're working on actually creating spaces to hold those programming full time on a daily basis, because I think that's where the transformation really happens. So we're excited about that.
And I think that talking about that transformation, and especially talking about like how you came into your own, you mentioned while you were a junior, you actually founded Wake. So what was that like? Because I mean, we know at Trey, right? The student athletes spend roughly 40 hours a week on sport. They spend roughly 30 hours a week on school. If they're only sleeping, 7 hours a night, that's another roughly 50 hours a week. So how did you make the time for this endeavor?
We may lose a few participants. You may see some numbers go down after I say this. I didn't watch TV. I did it. I no TV, no music. Well, a little music, no music. I'll be honest. And just minimal things. It was just really honing in on what, I wanted to do. And I had a 3-step process that I still use till today that I tell everybody to use. I mean, it works for me, but if it works for you, I hope it works for you. And the first is, when you have an idea, the first is painting it out clearly. What would this idea look like to perfection? Like, if everything went well, what would be the outcome? What would it feel like? What would it look like? What would I step into? What would be the ultimate world change? And then the second is reaching out to support systems in your immediate network to answer the next question. Who can I reach out to? Who may know about this? Who can put me in contact with somebody? Making that first attempt. And then the third is taking the action step. Create a logo, create a website, do something, make it real and bring it to life. And so with those 3 things, you're able to get a lot done, but also time management is key. And really figuring out what your priorities are and what you really need to lean into. And it's always a balance. We think of balance as something like this, but it's like, okay, what do I need to give into? It's constantly moving. So for me, we probably lost some participants, but no TV. Really, really focusing my efforts on what I really want and what I want to pour myself into was the key to that.
That's incredible. I think that one of the things that Rebecca and I and the rest of our team always try to do is start at the end goal and then actualize that goal by tracing it back to say, how do you start today, right? So hearing the way that you've detailed your own experiences in that way, starting off with very, very little time available, is just incredibly impressive.
It was fun. It was fun. Like I said, it never felt like work. It felt like, gosh, this is what the younger version of me would love. This is stories that I grew up with. This is conversation that I've had. It felt so necessary, and it felt like so much fun to do.
Highly impressive. And I think that one of the things we talk about regularly at Trey Athletes is this idea that no one just knows how to be involved in their community. And oftentimes we look to examples from people who, we admire or look up to. And at least in this case, it's athletes, right? So folks who have made or are making positive change through sport. And we also talk about, at Trey at least, how you can't talk about sports without talking about race. And some of the most famous athlete activists who immediately come to mind are legends like Muhammad Ali and Billie Jean King, who championed racial and gender equity in the 1960s and 70s, or LeBron James, Colin Kaepernick, Maya Moore today. What athletes or historical figures do you admire or try to emulate?
I absolutely love Maya Moore, and I've always loved her as a player. And now to see what she has done and the transformative work that she's doing, just puts her higher on my list. And she's always been someone that I deeply admire. And for me, I'm so inspired by everyone's work. I've always been like that. I've always been easily inspired, and someone stepping out in their field and in their line of work and saying, this is bigger than me. Um, I think it's just something that I'm always truly inspired by. And like everyone you named, I've looked up to them, have learned more about their history. I'm rooting them on, and they're continuing to make change. And, they are the giants, and those are the shoulders that we're standing on today. So I always say, athlete activism is not new, but we're seeing it in a different form. And it's been amazing to watch the transformation, but it's always been there. It's always been present. And we can't talk about sports without talking about life, because I think sports is a microcosm for the world that we live in today. And we can't silence those voices, because we all represent our own communities. And when you silence that, you silence the game, you silence the bridges that are created, and you silence the world that we should be living in.
Could not have said it any better. I have not heard it said any better. So I think that you're really onto something there as it relates to the history of athletes as social influencers. You mentioned that this is not new, right? So forgive me for a second. I want to drop a little bit of knowledge on our Trey athletes as it relates to kind of the history of athletes as social influencers, which I think is fascinating. So for those who research these types of movements, such as Dr. Edwards at Cal Berkeley, he would tell you that we're currently on our fourth wave of athlete activists. The first wave included athletes of the 1920s and 30s, such as boxers Jack Johnson and Joe Louis, and track star Jesse Owens, who represented the to establish Black athletes as legitimate in the eyes of white fans. And in the second wave, after World War II, athletes like Jackie Robinson, Kenny Washington, and Chuck Cooper broke the color lines in their respective sports, bringing desegregation to athletics while helping to kickstart the civil rights movement. The third wave included the Black Power and the civil rights movements of the 1960s and 70s, when athletes boxer Muhammad Ali, football player Jim Brown, and basketball player Bill Russell spoke out about racism and social justice in America. But then something kind of strange happened. Athletes began to work as spokespeople to help sell products in the 1980s, endorsing shoes and sports drinks, really anything and everything you can probably imagine. As a result, athletes stopped speaking out, at least for a period in time. And today, in the fourth wave, athletes are back on the front lines of the social movement, putting their financial independence and their social influence to work and advocating on behalf of the Black Lives Matter movement, as well as the gender equity movement. So certainly, things have changed in the United States during that period of time. Obviously here in the US, whether it's diversity and sort of the demographics and the makeup of the US has clearly changed, not just since the 20s, but even since the 60s. People are also more aware and they're more informed thanks to the internet, at least if they're getting good information, right? Athletes are wealthier and certainly more powerful today in society, and social media allows people to share their thoughts with millions at the click of a button. But to go from Michael Jordan refusing to speak out about social issues to Black Lives Matter being painted on NBA and WNBA basketball courts today, we've seen a seismic shift in the last 10 to 20 years. So Batouly, in your opinion, and after sort of the absence of athletes as social influencers in the 1980s and 90s, what do you think are the contributing factors to more widespread acceptance of athletes as social influencers today in 2021?
I would have to say the power of social media, and it's just so tough to say. Um, but I would say we were at a unique point where, I always think of this quote, I stand as one, but I come as 10,000. It's one of my favorite quotes. And when I think of 10,000, I think of walking into my community, and I think of everyone who has seen me grow up, every school that I've been to, every community that I represent. And for so long, once you get to another level, you kind of silence that community and where you come from, where you represent. And I think that was a huge part of that was fear, fear of what would happen, fear of losing, that stance or that power or that influence. And now we're at a point where, people are being celebrated for that, and it wasn't like that years ago. So we're seeing a huge shift, and it's been amazing to watch and to witness. Athletes, I think, have always had their opinions and their thoughts and their communities that they represent and movements that really matter to them, but now being supported globally. Again, social media and the power of that. And I would say young people have an amazing, young people are a force to be reckoned with. And, just the power that they have and their voice and how brave that they are today, I think that just adds so much to it. So the power of social media, I think everything that you said, you hit the nail on the head. And that's something that I would just keep reiterating. Wait, oh, I can't. Yeah.
I hadn't even put my finger on the button when it comes to the power of youth and the movements that we're able to make, this like decentralized movement that we're seeing, whether it's, BLM, whether it's Me Too, whether it's a whole host of different ways in which people are coming together, primarily young people. The Sunrise Movement is another one as it relates to climate. Talk to us a little bit about, I guess, first of all, how you manage your social media, and how that is a tool for you. And then dive a little deeper around like how you've specifically tried to engage the youth, and use your power as a young person, to bring people together through sport.
When I really understood the power of sport, I would say, or the power of social media, excuse me, I deleted it. I deleted it for about 6 months, and I went and I remember writing down my values, my visions for my social media, themes that I wanted to have on my page. What was this about? Because every platform is fleeting. And I said to myself, if I had 1 minute or 1 second or one opportunity to say something, what would I say? And I said, I would use it for good. I would use it to encourage someone. I want my page and my platform to serve as inspiration, for knowledge that I have, really dug deep on, and really reached out to other people to share, because I think that's really important how we share knowledge. I think that's an obligation that we have to share good and beneficial and truthful knowledge. And so that was, a core and a pillar that I had. And so when I sat down and said, okay, this is how I want my page to feel, I want someone to come on my page and feel energized, like I can do this too. Deeply inspired, moved, and again, educated. I think that was the core. And then from there, figuring out everything that aligned with that, and moving towards that, and everything that didn't, stepping away from that. Because when someone's on your page realistically, or on your platform, it's a second. What are they going to feel? What are they going to do? Is their day better off now that they've visited, and took the time out of their day to be on your platform or to learn more about you? And so I want to be very intentional about that. And for me, with young people, I think having the conversation in this time, even tomorrow can be different. We are in a dynamic space. And if you are not keeping up with it, you're going to be far behind. And it's like right now, I think there are common themes that we do have, that's really important. That's, social justice and athletes and activism. Those are common, and not even just themes. Those are real life that we're constantly dealing with. And so really hearing young people's voice, I constantly do forums, whether it's like quizzes, or, anybody who, will message me and has a question, or emails. I constantly try to respond back, because I think it's so important for them to be able to express themselves and have someone who they feel like is like-minded and can understand them, and can encourage them when they're in that space and in that momentum. So just listening as much as I can, providing spaces, to have dialogue, and just making sure that my page reflects that, and everything that I do reflects that.
And I think that, especially as we think about how like you've not only really harnessed the power of social media, but also, I read that you've been on over 90 panels, right? Probably pushing over 100 now. That's probably outdated, let's be honest. I mean, the children's book idea, I think, is also brilliant in that you're finding multiple channels and multiple avenues to tell your story, and to create change. So can you talk a little bit about how, maybe some of these different types of channels and different distribution channels, or communication channels have been part of your strategy as it relates to, getting your message out there?
That's from my own experiences. As I continue to grow and as I continue to learn, like I said, without TV, you learn different things. So, whether it's reading or a podcast or a great article or blogs, there are so many different ways to really receive information. And I feel like every time that I grow, I want to be able to share, it on a new channel, or seeing how this works. Because again, the message is the same: to be empowered, to be encouraged, to feel like I can do it, and to feel like half of our population should be involved in that is going to be key messages, throughout the things that I speak about. But having different ways to share that, and to that every person that receives that information is important, and how they receive it is important as well. And I think the most dynamic and amazing teachers that I've had in my life have been able to share information in different ways. Whether that's through PowerPoint, whether that's through flashcards or note cards, seeing how you learn is important. And when someone takes the time to diversify, you know, what they're teaching you, it shows that they care. And I always love this quote: people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And so for me, even in regards to the children's book, it's about a dynamic group of young girls, who are diverse, and have unique abilities coming together for a basketball game. But it was important for me to say, this needs to be available in Spanish. This needs to be available in French. So it's not just in terms of diversity in the book, but diversity in language and availability. Not everyone has access to a world of knowledge. How do we make that accessible? I think that's really, really important. And so, like I said, the best teachers that I've had have been able to share things in different ways. And if they haven't, they've been able to guide me towards someone who has. And I think that um, has been transformative in my life and something that I definitely wanted to replicate in anything that I did.
Creating diversity of thought through diversity of communication channels to me is just like mind-blowing in and of itself as it relates to concepts. So hats off to you and how you've so strategically and intentionally approached the way that you get your message out there. I think it's brilliant. And I think that going a little bit more meta here for just a second, one of the things that I was thinking about while I was reading and researching for this conversation, I actually kind of wondered to myself, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? In this case, I'm wondering, do athletes start social movements, or are they sort of responding to the voices of the masses? And I think that like seeing that play out through different forms of communication, but also through the movements that we're seeing take place right now is absolutely fascinating. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, Batouly, on athletes as leaders and founders of movements versus responsiveness to the masses.
I love this question. This question makes me think, it makes me just really, really think, and it makes me grow, which I love. Um, and I've really been thinking deeply about this. And for me, I think I always say, sport is a microcosm for the world that we live in. So we feel like we paint these lines, and once you step over, everything vanishes. It doesn't. And that's what when you're in a game and you're seeing that. And for me, playing professionally in Spain, I'm on a court with people who are speaking so many different languages. And I'm like, what did you just say? The shit in Spanish? What language is that? Like all in one court. And that's amazing. Why would I want to stop that? That's a shared experience. That's such a mutually beneficial experience that I may not have ever had. And so I think sports is a microcosm for the world that we live in. What I think that sport has a unique way of doing is amplifying messages in a unique way, um, that resonates deeply with the athletes. And so that's something that we've seen. Okay, there's this huge movement or something happens, and it may be, a silent movement, and then it's amplified through sport. But then again, it's amplified and shifted in a way that it resonates with that sport audience. Because it may be a microcosm for the world that we live in, but there is a certain audience that gears towards that, and that athlete audience, whatever it may be. And so I feel like athletes do a great job at really shifting and saying, this is our collective message, that resonates with us and our organizations and the work that we do, and here's how we want to then amplify that into the world, and share that into the world. So I think, I can't really say the chicken or the egg, but I would say it's a shared experience, and I think a collective effort and everyone doing their part, which I think is the most important aspect of that. Saying, this is information, this is how we share it. Again, keeping in mind the truth and everything about that. But I'm still grappling with that. I'm still figuring that out. But I love to hear everyone's thoughts about that. If you want to put that in the chat, I'm open to hearing that and open to learning and growing.
Could not agree more. I think that a couple of the things that jumped out at me, not only do I 1000% agree with you that sports is a microcosm for society, we just had our first fireside chat around the power and the culture and really the connectivity and the unifying elements of sports. But I think seeing it through social movements is like next level, right? And seeing how it can kind of be both, right? So whether it was the Milwaukee Bucks and how they walked off the court in the bubble this last year and refused to play in the wake of the Jacob Blake shooting, where they were responding to something that was happening in real time, versus I think that you look at someone like LeBron, where he started the More Than a Vote campaign along with Skylar Diggins and Patrick Mahomes and a number of other folks who really got behind and helped amplify this message in the ways that you were describing. So there's this sort of beautiful symmetry to the fact that like there's both proactive as well as reactive responses, and I think that seeing that play out in real time is just incredible. So I say all of that only to say, you were obviously an incredible college basketball player. We're seeing right now almost a little bit of conflict as it relates to the movements through sports. Whether it's liberal and progressive versus a more traditionally conservative crowd. There's been folks who have told athletes to shut up and dribble, and especially for those who, have it as part of their life's mission, like you've made it yours. I think that that's probably tough for some people to hear. But I think that where we're finding middle ground right now is with the not NCAA property movement. And so many of the college athletes who have now started to speak out as it relates to name, image, likeness, as it relates to academics, as it relates to well-being, injuries, you name it. And I think that whether you're on the left or the right, there's opportunity for a lot of people to gravitate towards what's happening within college sports right now and support that movement. Just to kind of clarify for our audience a little bit, on the left, it's obviously about human rights. And on the right, it's more so about, limiting or putting a ceiling on people's earning abilities. So finding that center of the Venn diagram, I think, is really, really interesting. And again, I say all of that only to say, as a former collegiate basketball player, would love to hear your thoughts on name, image, likeness, how that's going to affect upcoming student athletes, and maybe specifically from the perspective of a former women's basketball player.
I'm so excited about the name, image, likeness. Let's just clear that out right now. I'm really excited about it because I think, when you're in college and you have other people, or other students in class who have different opportunities, and you're like, I would never have that opportunity, as an athlete, as a student athlete. And so I think that was just a long time coming, and I'm excited for that. I'm excited for the opportunity, but I feel like there has to be a level of education established early on. That's my biggest concern. That's my biggest worry. And that will be around decision making. How do we make great decisions? How do players understand contracts? How do we understand finances? There are so many different things that are now going to be taken into consideration for athletes that worry me, because for me, going into college, it was about tradition, it was about history, it was about making memories with some of my best friends. That was what it was about. So I worry about that, and saying college is a place where you can fail, and you can fail in a supportive environment, and not many places where you can do that after, when you go into the adult world. And so I think just really having a lot of education in place for, just decision making, contract negotiations. I can't even imagine me doing that as a in college. Um, just figuring out expenses and budgeting and all these different things. So I'm excited about it. I think like I said, a long time coming, a step in the right direction, especially in the way that we're moving in this social media era, and just representation across the board, and now athletes being able to use that. But again, there has to be huge emphasis on education and making solid decisions, and really supporting student athletes through that decision, I think, is really key for that. But I'm excited about it. And they knew to not do that when I was in college, because they're like, just let her leave college and then we'll set it up.
It's going to be a really complex change to all things college sports, like you just described. And so I think that I personally would have loved to have seen what opportunities you would have championed, because I think that would I think, for example, like Shaq only endorses products that he personally uses, right? So I just have this gut feeling like you would have taken like a really intentional stance as it relates to the types of things that you would have either endorsed or stood behind. And I guess that presents another question. Like, is there anything off the top of your head, like, man, I wish I could have, been a spokesperson for XYZ?
This is my shameless plug. Coconut water. I drink way too much coconut water. I literally have one by me. I drink way too much coconut water. But honestly, I think that question makes me think of, for me, like I said, I came in with a pretty strong foundation. I was solid on who I was. I had mentors. My amazing mentor, Shanae Jones, who was my first coach at the age of 12, was like, Batouly, you need to go soul searching. You need to figure out who you are. And so my biggest worry is that kids are not, or student athletes won't be swayed. For me, I was very intentional. I had a foundation. I knew what I was going for and who I would align. So I completely agree with Shaq. I wouldn't endorse anything that I wouldn't use. And so now, at such a young and critical age, we need places like Trey Athletes. We need these organizations for athletes to really have that self-actualization and exploration to say, this is who I am. These are my pillars. I love to read. Maybe I'm going to go for books and for Kindles and for this, but that being said, just really figuring out who they are and to say that that can be beautifully reflected and not changing who they are and their identity to support other brands. And so I think that's going to be the biggest part and why we need organizations like Trey Athletes.
That's you're too kind, my friend.
Yeah.
We definitely come from similar perspectives in that way. I think that things are only going to get tougher for young adults. Kids have to grow up so much faster today, and we just want to be there to support these really high potential high school athletes to be the best possible versions of themselves.
And last thing to add to that point, again, the reason why it made sense is that now you see what overtime has done. Now
Yep.
you see more young players entering, and amazing, more young women entering the WNBA draft at a higher rates. Before everyone was waiting to their 4-year senior year, and now in their junior year, men going overseas. So it's such a different ballgame that we're competing at, and so I'm so interested to see, how that is, and for me working globally, how that affects recruitment globally and now locally. Where now there's so much access to different things. And so, like I said, just a long time coming in, it makes sense. Um, yeah, it just makes sense.
Shout out UConn, by the way, because I've been trying to find and buy a Paige Becker's jersey for the longest time. She is just on another level, and I'm so excited to see how this is going to especially affect young women who are collegiate athletes as well. I think there's a huge opportunity here. So in advance of our last couple of questions, I want to remind our audience, please include your questions in the chat and the Q&A below, and let us know if you'd like to come on video to ask your question live to Batouly. So that said, Batouly, 2 more questions that I have. The first would be, talk to us about your thoughts on kind of the successes and maybe some opportunities for improvement that we're seeing as it relates to the modern racial and gender equity movements through sports. So said another way, like, what are athletes doing well? What could maybe be improved? And what are the stakes today? Like, what do you believe the athletes of tomorrow and today will make a lasting impact on our country and our world, helping to ensure equal rights for all people? Is that realistic? Is that a possibility?
Yes. I wouldn't be doing this work if I didn't think so. But I definitely always ask myself, am I willing to fight for change I may never see happen?
Yes.
Are you willing to lay that brick and have your piece and say, this matters so much? And I hope that this is, again, I use that word so much, a foundation for someone else to lean on. But I would say for athletes today, the biggest thing is education. We must know, what we're doing. And so in this social media era, we are so quick to share. And I tell everyone, if 5 out of 10 things you share, if you just click it, you don't have to read it. Just click what you're about to share. Like, just click it and read the first sentence. I think that will go a long way. And so I think we have access at our fingertips, but really taking the next step. I always say, take the next step. If you are really passionate about, a campaign, take the next step. Who started it? Where is this happening? A share is amazing. Take the next step. And that can be a contribution, because I think right now we are spreading ourselves way too thin. And that's, again, something that I worry about for athletes. What are you naturally connected to? For me, it was my roots in this. And so oftentimes, even for me, I struggle. My initial goal, and because I'm talking to young people, my initial goal was every girl in the world should have access to basketball. That was it. I was like, until every girl in the world plays basketball, I will not stop. And it's like, that's great. I still feel that deeply in my heart, but you have to hone in and have a focus or you'll reach no one. And that's okay. And I always say, you may not invent the wheel, but keep it spinning where you see fit. And that matters. And when you put that together and you see the collective, it's amazing. But if you say, I'm not going to do that because someone did that, or, I'm not going to do that because it feels impossible. No, do your part where you see fit. And that is the impact. It's not about quantity, but about quality. And that matters. And you'll be more full than you have ever been. And so that is something that I really, really, think about often, is really feel connected to your communities and the work that you're doing, and that will always show. And the work will always prove itself, because it's important. It's important in those communities, and it's important in those lives that you're working with. So, I'm still figuring that out. You always have amazing questions. I'm still figuring that out. I'm interested to see what anyone has to say about that. But those are, I think, my my thoughts for that for now.
Well, you are inspiring, my friend, and I think that hearing the passion and hearing the work and the focus and hearing the intentionality that you take as it relates to your work is going to be a really great lesson for all those watching and listening, young or old. It's contagious. I just love talking with you. So I'm sad to say, last but not least, and before we turn it over to the audience for some Q&A. Last question here. In your opinion, Batouly, what does the future of athlete empowerment look like? Whether that's for the pros or maybe even for high school or college athletes. And then kind of tacked on to that, with our Trey athletes watching and listening at home, how can high school athletes who don't have the same platform as LeBron, how can they positively impact their communities?
I am so excited about the future because I can't even imagine it. Like, I can't even begin to fathom what the possibilities are because when you're with young people, like I said, just so amazing and at a point where they have so much energy and want to take action. That excites me for young people. But I think, what I kind of envision is just young leaders, outside of sport and saying, this is what I do, this is not who I am, and are competing on every aspect of life. Like, that really excites me. And so when I think of sports, I think of, now we're seeing global expansion, local expansion. I think just this beautiful mix of just holistic development and athletes and student athletes who are just young leaders and, are just educated and knowledgeable and, have these brands. And now when you see student athletes paving the way in their brands, it just opens the doors for other student athletes and women and everyone in that sector to do the same. And so now I would say many more workshops, many more people feeling empowered, much more funding, for young people to really step into that, to have amazing and creative ideas and to see where that takes them. So I'm really excited about that. And like I said, I don't know what the future holds, but I'm excited. I'm rooting everyone on and I can't wait.
Wow, future is bright, especially with established young leaders like you who have so much to offer. So as a guy who's a little bit older, I'm just super excited to see the way in which everything's coming together, both for you, for athletes as influencers today, and like you said, for the movement of the youth, which I think is going to be a tidal wave. So. We have a few questions here that I'm excited to share with you. So the first comes from Coach Cosme. So Coach Cosme says, how has being named to Forbes 30 Under 30 help grow what you are doing with women and kids empowerment? Do you have any partnerships lined up to help you grow? And what are you doing with your organization?
That is a great question. And thank you so much for tuning in. And so for Wake right now, Forbes Under 30, that was an amazing kind of moment. And I think for us, we celebrate as a team. When you're doing this work, you kind of put your head down and you're working and you look up and you're like, this matters. And it matters, but to be able to share that with the world and with your community and with your team, after 4 years of continuous work, it's really a special moment. And so, definitely thankful for that. And for us, it has opened up so many doors. And right now, as I mentioned, in the midst of creating the first indoor basketball court in our country and safe space that would act as a dynamic space for young women and kids to learn, grow, play, and ultimately build community is what we're really working to do. And serving as the after school program and again, summer camps in that space. So we're very excited about that. And that has opened doors for that conversation. And we are in the midst of really tying down a few partnerships. I can't really talk about it, but a few partnerships that we are really excited about and can't wait to share with you all. But that process has been so rewarding to share with the world. And as they said, like that's kind of what we're doing at the moment. And a huge focus on that is our crowdfunding campaign and really working to launch that as we work to do day-to-day programming.
Incredible. And I think for this next one, we're actually going to have one of our coaches join us on video. I know that Rebecca is going to be working to bring Coach Jones on now. Coach Jones, I see you there. And here he is, the man of the hour. It's so good to see you. Welcome, welcome.
Welcome. Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm still getting used to this whole computer thing, so I'm aging myself, but I'm trying to keep up. Uh, Good evening, Batouly. Batouly, I just want to say thank you for your story. It's an amazing story. We all have our own stories, and just hearing from different people from around the world in different places. This experience, even if it's been my second week, has just been rewarding in itself. And that being said, I do have, we have 4 boys in the home. Our daughter is out in older, but the younger ones are still here. They all play ball. But my question for you specifically is, when you decided to play ball, or in terms of going overseas to Spain, or where you're playing now, what made you go that direction? And then also, did you aspire to be in the WNBA? Because listening to your story, I can see why you're where you are, but at the same time, the WNBA is out there and is thriving. So those would be my 2 questions.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to tune in. I really appreciate it. I love that poster. I had that poster in my dorm room for about 10 years. So I love that. I love that poster. And for me, it was always a dream to play in the WNBA. I grew up in New York City, would always go to Liberty games, and, a huge fan of the W. And so that was ultimately my largest goal. And, as life would have it, things were a bit different for me, and a few injuries. And so for that, really taking the step to go play professionally overseas felt like the best next option for me. And it was an opportunity of a lifetime. I was there for 8 months. And initially when I went, it was contacting the agent, kind of going through those steps of figuring out if this is what I want to do, contacting the agent, and then sitting down with people who really knew me and saying, with your style of play, where would you fit? And then you kind of narrow down and focus, what leagues or what players kind of play like you, look like you. And then you and your agent set out to say, what does my future look like? What do I want? And what are my goals? Am I playing for luxury? Am I playing to continue growing and to continue working on my game? Is there, WNBA insight? And so you have that conversation early on with your agent and with your team. And from there, you solidify a team and you pack your bags. And 8 months later, you look back and you're back home and you're a completely different person. But for me, that was my experience, and one that I would love to continue talking about with you if you want to. But I think that's so important, and again, such a transformative experience and so different than college when you're playing the game at that level.
Yes, I would like to also do that. I know she's not here with me, but my assistant coordinator, very strong young lady. She's very strong and opinionated, and I would certainly like to kind of connect you two, because in terms of building that women's spirit and that movement going forward, I would love to touch base at some point to connect our school with your school, but more specifically with our leadership on the girls' side, to hear you speak with her. 'Cause I think she'd be amazed at your story, and be able to hear what you would have to say to our young ladies at our school.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to see you, Coach Jones, and thanks for joining us again tonight.
Thank you.
All right, so Batouly, this next question is from Jada, who is one of our soccer and basketball players. How do you learn how to react to offensive things people say in the stands or even on the court? Obviously, we can't control other people, but would love to hear your thoughts, in terms of how do you react to that, both internally and externally?
That is never easy. But I think really studying and sitting with yourself and saying, okay, if this were to happen, how would I react? I think that's first, really, really sitting down and thinking about different things, I think is key. Then the second is when someone says that, I always ask, where is that from? Where did you learn that? Where is that from? And ultimately what I found is um, when you have conversations with certain people, it's typically curiosity. It's the unknown. It's a learning experience, and that's not usually for everyone to have. But for me, I found that to be very beneficial in saying, okay, why is this person reacting that way? And I always say, Beat them with kindness. Kindness matters because this may be their first interaction with you and their last, and that opinion will last. But once Michelle Obama said it, when they go low, you go high, and you show who you are. Because in that moment, when you show, a different version, or you try to be an eye for an eye, that never wins, and you never feel good. You never feel satisfied. You walk away feeling worse, but saying, this is who I am. This is the communities that I represent. And that's something that's out of my control. So that's typically how I deal with it, with a state and a heart of compassion and kindness, and saying, I can only show who I am, and that's what matters, and that's what counts. So I think that's a great question.
An eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind, right? And I think that you couldn't have said it any better. Jada, if with you watching from home, Batouly is someone to admire and follow and watch from afar, because she's taken so many of the right choices in her life. So I can only imagine where it's going to take her from here. And Jada actually had a follow-up question too.
To that.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. And if I can add one more point to that, Jada, I remember when I was in Spain and I'd be in so many games where no one looked like me. There was no one on the court like me. And I would just close my eyes and I would say, I am so loved. Oh my goodness. I am loved. I'm loved. I'm valued. I'm cared about. And that really brings you back to yourself. So I'd say in those moments, knowing how loved you are and saying that this situation or this moment is temporary, really brings you back to yourself and brings you back to your joy and to balance. So I would always say, when something happens and you're like, where's that from? I'm loved. People care about me and I'm loved. That always brings me back to balance.
I'm not crying, you're crying. That's really great advice, Batouly. Thank you so much. And so Jada's second question, her follow-up is, when you were getting rid of some of your minor distractions, like I think whether it's TV or some of the noise in your life, she asks, when you were getting rid of your minor distractions to focus on things you needed to do, what was your mindset? Like, what kept you being consistent?
I love these questions, Jada. These are amazing questions. And my mindset was, who is the person that I want to become? And sometimes I would sit down, who is the Batouly that I want to be? What does she look like? What does she feel like? How does she, walk into a room? What is her life? What is her mission? What is her values? And I would sit there and I would think about it so deeply. And this is, again, me at 15 and 16. Everyone's like, what is she doing? But it felt so real to me. And I just remember being, again, easily inspired by everyone that I was around and the work that they were doing. And my mindset was, how do I continue to take a step towards her? How do I continue to take a step towards the world that I want to live in? How do I continue to take a step towards to being a better friend and being a better basketball player? And our coach at UConn would always say to us, how you do one thing is how you do everything. And I used to hate that quote. I'm like, no, I don't. Like, I don't do homework the way I play no, I don't. But it was real. How you do one thing is how you do everything, because you are creating winning habits. You are creating winning habits, and how you approach life is what you'll do in everything. And if you want to be a champion in your life and on the court and off the court and in your family, how do you approach that? And how do you set goals so that? How do you put hours towards that? How do you really hone into those identities that you have and that you want to continue developing and flourishing? So I would say my mindset was, every day is a step closer. Every day is an opportunity to be better, and it's in those split-second decisions, in those moments, that can be the difference. And I really felt like it was important. And the biggest thing is I really worked to surround and to consume things that led me towards that. So my mindset was, how do I take a step to being a better person? I'm a better sister, a better player, because all of that will add up, and ultimately you'll look up and you'll be there where you want to be.
I think we've all gotten a little bit better today, thanks to all this incredible knowledge that you're dropping on us. So thank you so much, Batouly. We have just another minute or two, and wanted to give you just a little bit of space as it relates. This is the end of our conversation. Would love to just kind of open things up and give you the floor to finish in whatever way you would prefer.
For me, yeah. Amazing.
Open
Okay.
season for you.
It's my finish. I'm like, okay, everyone get ready. But no, thank you all so much for taking the time to tune in. It really, really means a lot when we sit and we share stories and we grow. This is a shared experience. I learned and I grew so much from those questions and this opportunity to speak with you all. The conversation never stops here, so please feel free to carry it on or to follow me or to reach out and for us to really interact and connect. At the moment for Wake, like I said, we're building the first indoor basketball court in our entire country. That's an exciting project. That's something that keeps me up at night. That makes me excited. That's one of my biggest dreams, and it's now become our community dream and something that we all want and that we are all looking forward to. And there are so many girls, who are waiting for this dynamic space to step into their leadership roles and step into who they are and their limitless potential. And we're just excited about this dynamic space. So please follow us on that journey. We'll be posting that on our website at www.wake-academy.org and throughout all of our social media channels and on my Instagram and my social media channels. So please follow our journey, be a part of our family, and thank you so much for this time and this opportunity.
Pleasure is all ours, Batouly. And with that, our Q&A with Batouly has now come to a close. So Batouly, through your incredible experiences and stories, getting a little bit closer to, actualizing that best version of yourself, I think, like I mentioned before, we're all one step closer tonight. So thank you so much for talking with us about the history of athletes as social influencers as a part of Trey Season 3. Thank you for being an athlete activist and for all the incredible ways in which you're improving both, yourself, your local community, the global community. It's incredible. So in advance of passing it back to LaJoy, and on behalf of every single one of our Trey athletes, coaches, and families, thank you so much for joining us, Batouly. You're truly an inspiration.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Take us home, LaJoy.
An amazing conversation. I learned so much. I feel so inspired from all the amazing work that you've done. Thank you a million times for joining us. To all of our athletes and coaches who are joining us tonight, I am so excited for you all to have a debrief session this week about the amazing topics that were covered in tonight's debrief session. We have dropped the link for you in the chat for you to register for our next Fireside Chat. And there's also a survey up for you to give us some feedback on how your experience was tonight. With that, we're going to go ahead and close it up. Thank you all for your time and for being with us. And until next time, to athletes everywhere, good night.